Dr. John Watson here, stepping out of the familiar shadows of Baker Street to greet you. I find myself, as ever, drawn to the remarkable, the perplexing, and the very human drama that unfolds in the Grand Theatre of London. Tonight, I invite you to join Sherlock Holmes and myself on an extraordinary journey into the labyrinthine depths of a mystery that defied conventional understanding, a case that truly tested the limits of deduction. Prepare yourselves, for the gas lamps are lit, the fog begins to creep, and the game, as my friend would say, is most certainly afoot. If you appreciate tales of logic, intrigue, and the relentless pursuit of truth, I urge you to subscribe to the channel, ensuring you never miss an unravelling. Now, let's begin with the first chapter of The Bell That Rang at Midnight. Chapter 1. The Stillness in the Study. It was a particularly bleak evening in late November, the sort that seemed to press the very breath from the city. A persistent icy drizzle had given way to a thick yellow fog, clinging to the gas lamps and muffling the usual clamour of the London streets. Holmes had been engaged in one of his characteristic bouts of melancholy, staring into the embers of the fireplace, his violin neglected by his side. Suddenly a sharp rap at our door shattered the contemplative silence. It was Inspector Lestrade, his usually florid face pale and etched with an unusual gravity. "Holmes, Watson, I fear I have a most perplexing matter for you. A case of, well, rather unusual circumstances. It demands your peculiar talents, Holmes." We bundled ourselves into a hansom cab, the journey through the Mayfair streets feeling like an immersion into a phantom world. The cab pulled up before a grand stone-fronted residence, its windows dark and uninviting. A constable stood guard by the ornate oak door, his breath pluming in the chill air. "Lord Ashworth, Holmes," Lestrade explained as we entered the hushed hallway, the air thick with the scent of old wood and something vaguely medicinal. A man of considerable repute in antiquarian circles, a collector of ancient texts and curious artefacts, found this morning by his housekeeper, Mrs. Gable. We were led into a spacious study, a room that spoke volumes of its occupant. Bookshelves groaned under the weight of countless tomes, their leather bindings gleaming dully in the light of a single lamp. Ancient maps adorned the walls, and vitrines displayed an array of archaeological curiosities. At the centre, behind a massive mahogany desk cluttered with papers, sat Lord Ashworth. He was a man of perhaps 60 years, with a sharp, aquiline nose and a neatly trimmed grey beard. He appeared to be seated comfortably in his high-backed chair, a volume open on his lap, spectacles resting on the bridge of his nose. To the casual observer, he might have seemed merely absorbed in his reading, perhaps having dozed off. Yet the unnatural stillness, the very absence of life, hung heavy in the air. There were no visible marks of struggle, no overturned furniture, nothing to suggest violence. He was simply deceased. "Passed peacefully, it seems," Lestrade murmured, glancing around with a bewildered frown. "No signs of forced entry. The doors were bolted from within. Mrs. Gable assures us no one else was in the house." Holmes, however, did not share Lestrade's simplistic assessment. He moved with the quiet intensity of a predator, his keen eyes sweeping every inch of the room. He circled the desk, his gaze lingering on the various items, a half-empty teacup, a quill pen resting beside an inkwell, a small, intricate silver bell. Not a servant's bell, but an ornamental piece, which lay on a pile of documents, oddly prominent. He picked it up, weighing it in his hand, a faint, almost imperceptible gleam entering his eyes. "Watson, observe," Holmes said, his voice a low murmur, barely audible above the crackle of the fire. "The posture, the book, all suggest a natural end, do they not? But what of the precisely arranged papers beneath this bell, or the faint scent of almond, almost masked by the older aroma of the study?" He bent closer to the deceased, his gaze fixed on the man's perfectly calm face. No distress, no contortion, a rather tranquil departure, were it not for one crucial detail. He reached out ever so gently and picked up the open book from Lord Ashworth's lap. It was a dense treatise on ancient Sumerian astronomy. "Look here, Watson, page 247. The text concerns the movements of celestial bodies, specific constellations, and the cycles of certain astrological events, yet his spectacles, perfectly placed, rest upon a passage discussing the properties of a rare, non-toxic pigment used in ancient manuscripts. My brow furrowed. A non-toxic pigment? What possible relevance could that have? Holmes merely smiled, a fleeting, almost imperceptible twitch of his lips. Precisely, my dear Watson. Precisely. Lestrade, has the household staff been thoroughly questioned? And what of this silver bell? Is it customary for Lord Ashworth to keep such an item on his desk? A nervous elderly gentleman with a pristine suit and an air of professional distress now entered the study. I am Mr. Reed, Lord Ashworth's solicitor, he announced, his voice reedy. A terrible shock. Lord Ashworth was in robust health, always so particular. He had no enemies that I was aware of. And that bell, I've never seen it on his desk before. Is usually kept in the display cabinet in the drawing room. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Indeed. A bell out of place, a book open to an irrelevant passage, and a scent barely detectable. And midnight, Lestrade, he added, indicating a magnificent grandfather clock in the corner, its pendulum still, its hands frozen at 12. Always midnight. The clock stopped at midnight, Holmes, Lestrade confirmed. But surely that's just a coincidence, perhaps the last time he wound it. Perhaps, Holmes conceded, though his tone suggested otherwise. Or perhaps it is a deliberate and profound statement. Lord Ashworth, Mr. Reed, was he engaged in any significant projects recently? Any research? Any acquisitions? Particularly anything of a secretive nature? Mr. Reed wrung his hands. He was always discreet about his research. But he did mention acquiring a rather unique set of documents recently, from an obscure collection. He spoke of them as being of immense historical value, hinting at some extraordinary revelation. He was due to discuss them with me this very morning, regarding their authentication and a potential trust fund for their display. Holmes nodded slowly, his gaze returning to the small silver bell. A unique set of documents, a bell out of place, a stopped clock, and a tranquil demise concealing a subtle yet potent truth. The stillness in this study, Watson, is not one of peace, but of a carefully constructed tableau. This bell, I fancy, has a more significant part to play than its size suggests. The game, Lestrade, has truly begun. Chapter 2. Whispers at Charing Cross. The following morning, a biting wind swept through the grimy forecourt of Charing Cross Station, whipping the tails of my coat and chilling me to the bone. Holmes, however, seemed oblivious to the elements, his attention entirely consumed by the ebb and flow of humanity around us. The station was a microcosm of London itself, porters shouting, steam engines hissing, passengers bustling with purposeful energy, their faces a fleeting gallery of anxieties and anticipations. Our man, Lord Ashworth, was a creature of habit, Watson, Holmes remarked, observing a newsboy hawking his papers with an almost scientific detachment. His solicitor, Mr. Reed, confirmed his usual routine, a morning constitutional, followed by a visit to a particular book dealer near the Strand, then research at the British Museum, and finally home for his evening studies. Yet the housekeeper mentioned a sudden unexplained departure yesterday afternoon, a hurried cab journey to an undisclosed destination. He returned late just before his demise. Our first objective, therefore, was to trace this mysterious afternoon excursion. Holmes had a particular knack for extracting information from the most unlikely sources. He approached a wizened old porter, whose face was a road map of wrinkles and soot. His cap perched precariously on his head. "My good man," Holmes began, his voice surprisingly gentle, "you have the eyes of one who sees much yet speaks little. I seek information regarding a gentleman, well-dressed, elderly, with a distinguished grey beard, who departed from here in a hansom yesterday afternoon around 3 o'clock, perhaps returning later in the evening." The porter, a Mr. O'Malley, scratched his chin. "Aye, a fair few like that, governor, but there was one. Stood out 'cause he was agitated, he was. Kept looking at his pocket watch, then at the clock tower. Had a small leather-bound case with him. Not a portmanteau, more like a document case. And he asked me, not 10 minutes before his cab arrived, if the trains to Canterbury were on schedule. Most particular he was about the connections. Canterbury, a new piece in the puzzle. Holmes's eyes glittered. "Did you notice the cab he took, Mr. O'Malley, or perhaps the driver?" "Can't say to the driver, Gov, but the cab, 'twas one of them older models, well-maintained though, with a rather distinctive brass fitting on the lamps. And the gentleman, he seemed to be meeting someone. I saw him exchange a quick word with a younger fella, sharply dressed, dark hair, thin moustache. About 5'8", if I recall. They stood near the bookstall for a moment, then the younger fella melted into the crowd." Holmes pressed a shilling into the porter's hand, his thanks succinct. Canterbury, Watson, and a shadowy figure. Our antiquarian was not merely indulging a whim. He was on a mission, a secretive one, involving documents of immense historical value, as Mr. Reed described them. We scoured the station, Holmes examining the schedule boards, the booking office, even the discarded newspapers. Near the bookstall he paused, his gaze fixed on a small, rather dusty receipt fluttering beneath a bench. It was for a railway ticket purchased for a single journey to Canterbury, dated yesterday afternoon, and the destination was underlined in red ink. Not Lord Ashworth's usual meticulous hand, but a more hurried, almost aggressive flourish. "The plot thickens, Watson," Holmes announced, carefully folding the receipt. Lord Ashworth travelled to Canterbury, ostensibly to meet someone, likely the source of these unique documents. The red underlining suggests either urgency or a coded instruction. Now, if our discreet meeting took place at the station, perhaps some form of communication preceded it. He led us to the telegraph office, a small bustling room filled with the staccato clicks of Morse code. Holmes spoke to the telegraphist, a sharp-featured woman with an air of brisk efficiency, her fingers flying over the keys. "My good madam, I am making inquiries on behalf of the late Lord Ashworth. He sent a telegram yesterday afternoon, around 2:30. Could you recall the recipient, or even the content?" The telegraphist consulted her ledger. "Ah, yes. Lord Ashworth, a rather unusual message, sent to an address in Canterbury, a Mr. Edmund Carver, an academic. The message simply read, 'The bell will ring at midnight. Proceed as discussed.'" I gasped. "The bell, and midnight! This connects directly to the items in his study." Holmes's expression was one of profound satisfaction. "Indeed, Watson, the ornamental bell on his desk, the stopped clock, and now this telegram. This bell is clearly a prearranged signal. But for what? And why would Lord Ashworth, a man of such repute, involve himself in a venture requiring such clandestine signals? And who is Edmund Carver? Is he friend or foe?" We left Charing Cross, the morning fog now beginning to lift, revealing the grey stone buildings of London under a bruised sky. Holmes had a thoughtful, almost predatory gleam in his eyes. "Canterbury holds the key, Watson. Or rather, Mr. Edmund Carver holds the key. The bell, it seems, tolls for more than just Lord Ashworth. We shall proceed to Canterbury, a scholarly expedition, as it were." Chapter 3. The Scholar's Den. Our journey to Canterbury was swift and uneventful, the landscape gradually transforming from the sooty urban sprawl to the undulating green hills of Kent. The cathedral city, with its ancient spires piercing the grey sky, exuded an aura of scholarly peace, a stark contrast to the urgency of our mission. Holmes, ever observant, remarked on the subtle differences in the architecture, the local dialects, even the particular species of birds that flocked in the cathedral precincts. Our destination was a modest ivy-clad house nestled on a quiet street near the university, the residence of Mr. Edmund Carver. We found him not in a grand study, but in a cramped, disorganized room, overflowing with books, papers, and maps, a true scholar's den, far less refined than Lord Ashworth's elegant sanctuary. Mr. Carver was a man in his late 50s, gaunt and stoop-shouldered, with spectacles perched precariously on his nose and ink stains on his fingers. His attire was rumpled, and his hair, an unruly grey mop, looked as though it had not seen a comb in days. He received us with a mixture of polite deference and bewildered apprehension. "Dr. Watson, Mr. Holmes," he said, ushering us further into the clutter. "This is a surprise. I heard about Lord Ashworth. A terrible tragedy. He was a good man, if a little zealous in his pursuits." Holmes wasted no time with pleasantries. "Mr. Carver, we understand you were in communication with Lord Ashworth shortly before his passing. A telegram mentioning the bell will ring at midnight. What can you tell us about this?" Mr. Carver visibly flinched, his eyes darting around the room. "Ah, yes, the telegram. A code, you see. Lord Ashworth and I, we were collaborating on a rather delicate matter. A discovery, really. He had acquired a collection of ancient Roman scrolls, unearthed near Hadrian's Wall, that purported to contain not merely historical records, but a coded sequence, a sort of key." "A key to what, Mr. Carver?" I asked, intrigued by this unexpected turn. "To a location," he replied, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Specifically to a lost vault, a hidden chamber rumoured to exist beneath a particular Roman temple site in Britain. A chamber said to house not merely relics, but a mechanism, a device, some believe, of immense power or knowledge. The scroll spoke of it as the silent oracle, activated only by the midnight bell. And Lord Ashworth believed this? Holmes pressed, his voice sharp. Absolutely. He was utterly convinced. He was meticulous, you see, a true believer in the esoteric. The scrolls are genuine. I've verified their age and provenance. The code within them, however, was exceptionally complex. We had been working on it for months. The bell message was his way of telling me he had finally cracked a significant portion of the code, enough to pinpoint a precise location. And did he share this location with you? Carver shook his head. No, not yet. He was to do so yesterday evening. He was to visit an old friend in London, a fellow antiquarian, to cross-reference some obscure historical maps, and then send me the full details. He promised to telegraph me late last night after the bell had rung, as it were. But then, this terrible news. Holmes's gaze fell upon a framed photograph on a cluttered shelf. A group of 4 men, all scholars, standing before a ruin. Lord Ashworth was among them, as was Mr. Carver. Another man, dark-haired and intense, stood slightly apart. "Who is this gentleman, Mr. Carver?" Holmes inquired, pointing to the intense man. "Ah, Professor Taylor Reed," Carver replied, his voice laced with a subtle bitterness. "A brilliant mind, but a contentious personality. He was part of our initial research group, convinced these scrolls were forgeries, a waste of time. He even tried to discredit Lord Ashworth's work publicly. A bitter feud ensued, and Professor Reed eventually withdrew from our circle entirely. He was obsessed with the idea of a great unveiling, a public discrediting of Ashworth. He considered Ashworth a rival, you see, a flamboyant showman who lacked true academic rigour. I immediately thought of Lord Ashworth's solicitor, Mr. Reed. The same name, but surely not the same person. "He is not the solicitor you mentioned, Watson," Holmes said, as if reading my thoughts. "A different Reed, I surmise, but a man with a motive to disrupt Ashworth's grand reveal. Tell me, Mr. Carver, where did this Professor Reed reside, and did he possess any unique knowledge of the silent oracle beyond what was in the scrolls?" Carver hesitated, his gaze still fixed on the photograph. "Professor Reed lives in Hampstead, I believe, and as for knowledge, he always scoffed at the oracle, but he was fascinated by a particular symbol within the scrolls, a symbol resembling a bell. He called it the Mark of Midnight, claiming it indicated a fabricated ritual." Holmes's eyes were alight. "A fabricated ritual, or a cleverly concealed clue? Mr. Carver, thank you. You have provided us with a most illuminating afternoon. The silent oracle, the midnight bell, and a bitter rival. The threads begin to weave, Watson. We return to London. The great unveiling of Professor Reed may yet reveal more than he intended." Chapter 4. The Artist's Secret. Back in the labyrinthine heart of London, the fog had returned with a vengeance, thick and opaque, lending the streets an otherworldly hush. Holmes directed our hansom through the bohemian warrens of Chelsea, the gas lamps mere blurred halos in the suffocating gloom. Our destination was a dilapidated artist's studio situated above a dusty curiosity shop, a setting entirely different from the polished elegance of Mayfair or the academic austerity of Canterbury. "Professor Reed, the academic rival, has an address in Hampstead, Watson," Holmes explained as the cab rattled over cobblestones. "However, a discreet inquiry at the British Museum archives revealed that he recently commissioned a series of illustrations for a book he was writing, a scathing critique of esoteric archaeology, coincidentally, featuring Lord Ashworth's theories as prime examples of academic folly. The artist, one Silas Croft, works from this very studio." We ascended a creaking wooden staircase, the air growing heavy with the scent of turpentine and stale tobacco. The studio was a cavernous space, poorly lit by a single skylight. Canvases in various stages of completion leaned against the walls, depicting everything from classical ruins to grotesque caricatures. Silas Croft was a man in his late 20s, thin and pale with intense feverish eyes and paint-splattered hands. He greeted us with an air of nervous suspicion, clutching a palette knife like a weapon. "Mr. Croft, a moment of your time, if you please," Holmes began, his voice calm yet authoritative. "We are investigating the unfortunate demise of Lord Ashworth. We understand you were recently commissioned by Professor Reed." Croft's eyes widened, and he gestured nervously towards an unfinished portrait on an easel. It depicted a stern, almost sneering Professor Reed holding a large ornate bell. "Professor Reed?" "Yes, he commissioned me. A series of illustrations, rather cynical for his new book. He was quite particular about the imagery, especially this bell. He insisted it be prominent in the frontispiece, describing it as the symbol of ancient folly." "A bell, you say?" I interjected, a shiver running down my spine. "The very symbol Lord Ashworth used in his code." "Indeed," Holmes murmured, his gaze sweeping the studio, pausing at a small, locked wooden box on a side table. "And did Professor Reed discuss the specific origins or significance of this bell?" Croft hesitated, then lowered his palette knife. "He mentioned it was a representation of a fabricated artifact from one of Lord Ashworth's absurd expeditions. He showed me sketches, very detailed. He was strangely obsessed with it, and he specifically requested I depict it with an inscription, a line of Latin, Campana Nox Silentium, roughly, the bell of silent night." Holmes's eyes narrowed. Campana Nox Silentium, the silent oracle activated by the midnight bell, a direct echo of Lord Ashworth's work. It seems Professor Reed was not merely discrediting, but actively engaging with the very symbols he condemned. "Mr. Croft, did Professor Reed happen to leave any of his research materials here? Any notes, perhaps even a draft of his manuscript?" Croft wrung his hands. "He did. He left a rather substantial dossier last week, for me to reference the historical inaccuracies he wished to highlight. He asked me to keep it secure until he returned to collect it. It's in that box, actually. He's rather paranoid about his work being seen before publication." Holmes, with a swift, almost imperceptible movement, reached for the box. "I dare say, Mr. Croft, Professor Reed's paranoia may be justified, and that box, I fancy, contains more than just a draft." The box was locked, but Holmes produced a set of delicate instruments from his pocket. In a matter of seconds, with a faint click, the lid sprang open. Inside lay not merely a manuscript, but a collection of ancient maps, remarkably similar in style to those Lord Ashworth had collected. On one map, a particular location, near a forgotten Roman encampment, was circled in red ink, and pinned to the map was a photograph of a decaying bell tower, its archways empty, standing sentinel over a desolate field. But it was the small, folded piece of paper tucked beneath the photograph that truly commanded Holmes's attention. It was a note, written in Professor Reed's furious hand. "Ashworth's last expedition was a fool's errand. The oracle is a delusion, but the true prize hidden beneath the Tower of Midnight is mine. His midnight bell will toll for him alone, a prelude to my triumph. He sought only knowledge, I seek its power." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp studio. The Tower of Midnight, and he speaks of power. Holmes carefully refolded the note, his face grim. "Precisely, Watson. Reed knew the location. He knew the significance of the bell. He claimed it was a fabrication, yet he pursued it himself. His scathing critique was merely a smokescreen. He used Croft to illustrate the very symbol that was his target. He did not merely wish to discredit Lord Ashworth. He wished to steal his discovery, and perhaps prevent him from ever revealing it. The bell was not merely a signal, but a destination, and a symbol of a dangerous ambition." It seems Professor Reed was not content to merely scoff from the sidelines. He wanted the spoils of the silent oracle for himself, and he ensured that Lord Ashworth's midnight bell rang only for his silence. Chapter 5. The Toll of Truth. The grand, decaying manor of Blackwood Hall stood silhouetted against a bruised twilight sky, its ancient stones whispering tales of forgotten grandeur. Situated on the outskirts of London, accessible by a meandering country lane, it was a place where time seemed to have paused. Holmes and I had arrived in a hastily procured carriage, the journey long and silent, punctuated only by the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves and the rustle of papers in Holmes's hand. He clutched the note from Silas Croft's studio, his expression a mixture of grim determination and intellectual triumph. "Blackwood Hall, Watson," Holmes stated, pointing to a crumbling stone archway that once marked a grand entrance. A forgotten estate now owned by Professor Reed, inherited from a distant reclusive relative. The very Tower of Midnight mentioned in his note, I surmise. A Roman watchtower long since repurposed into a bell tower for this decaying hall, only to fall into disuse. A rather poetic choice for a hidden vault, wouldn't you say? We cautiously made our way through an overgrown, disused garden, the thorny rose bushes clawing at our coats. The air here was heavy with the scent of damp earth and neglect. As we approached the hall, a faint metallic clang, almost lost in the rising wind, reached our ears. "The bell, Watson," Holmes whispered, quickening his pace. "It seems our Professor Reed is already at his triumph." We found the main door ajar, leading into a vast, cobweb-draped entrance hall. Dust motes danced in the sliver of moonlight filtering through a broken skylight. Following the faint sound, which now grew more distinct, a rhythmic clink-clink thud, we made our way to the far end of the hall, where a narrow circular staircase spiraled upwards into darkness. At the top, in a crumbling turret, was a small octagonal room. Professor Reed was there, a lantern illuminating his gaunt, sweat-streaked face. He was crouched beside a section of the wall, frantically prying at loose stones with a small crowbar. On a rough wooden table nearby lay Lord Ashworth's ancient Roman scrolls, now unfurled, their faded script visible. A small, elaborate bronze bell, tarnished with age, lay beside them. The midnight bell itself, I realized, far more ancient and significant than the ornamental silver one on Ashworth's desk. "Professor Reed," Holmes announced, his voice cutting through the echoing silence like a surgeon's scalpel. Reed started violently, dropping his crowbar with a clatter. His eyes, wild and bloodshot, fixed on us, his face contorted with a mixture of fear and fury. "Holmes! What are you doing here? This is private property. You have no right." "No right to expose a thief and a murderer, Professor?" Holmes retorted, stepping into the room, his shadow looming large in the lantern light. Lord Ashworth's unfortunate demise was no accident. The almond scent of cyanide on his teacup, perfectly masked by his usual tea. His spectacles strategically placed on a passage about pigments, designed to mislead. The ornamental bell on his desk, a message for you, Professor. A coded warning from Ashworth that he knew of your treachery. He knew you were pursuing the silent oracle yourself. Reed laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Ashworth was a fool, obsessed with knowledge, while I saw the power. He was close, too close, to unlocking the vault beneath this very tower. He sent that telegram, "The bell will ring at midnight," not to Carver, but to me. He meant it as a warning, a declaration that he had solved the riddle, that he knew of my plan. I intercepted the real telegram to Carver and sent a fake one confirming his death by natural causes, so no one would connect him to his work here. "Indeed," Holmes continued calmly, "you needed to silence him before he could reveal the true nature of the midnight bell to the academic world, or worse, expose your own surreptitious research into the silent oracle. You visited him, Professor, feigning reconciliation, and administered the poison during his evening tea. You then arranged the scene to appear as a peaceful death, took the real bronze bell, and left the ornamental one as a final mocking gesture. The stopped clock, a clear message to you, to meet at midnight, here at the Tower of Midnight to claim your prize." Reed's face was a mask of furious resignation. He thought he could outwit me. He thought his midnight bell signal would deter me. But it only fueled my determination. "The vault is within my grasp, Holmes. I shall be the one to unveil the oracle's true power." He lunged for the scrolls, perhaps intending to destroy them, but Holmes was swifter. With a deft movement, Holmes intercepted Reed, securing the scrolls and the bronze bell. Lestrade and his men, alerted by a telegram Holmes had sent from Canterbury, now stormed into the turret, their footsteps echoing. "Professor Taylor Reed," Lestrade declared, his voice grim, "you are under arrest for the murder of Lord Ashworth." Reed, defeated, slumped against the wall, his gaze fixed on the hidden section of the wall. The bell. It was supposed to ring for my triumph. Holmes, holding the ancient bronze bell, examined it closely. "This bell, Professor, has indeed rung. But not for your triumph. It has rung at midnight for Lord Ashworth's silence, and now it rings for your undoing. The silent oracle remains silent thanks to your greed. But the truth, Professor, has a voice that cannot be stilled." As Lestrade led the despondent Reed away, Holmes turned to me, the faint light of dawn now beginning to seep through the broken skylight, chasing away the shadows of Blackwood Hall. A fascinating case, Watson. The bell that rang at midnight, not as a signal for discovery, but as a silent testament to a life extinguished, and a villain unmasked. Another testament to the fact that even in the quietest corners of London the most profound dramas are always unfolding. And with that we left the decaying grandeur of Blackwood Hall, the ancient bell tower standing silent once more, its secrets safe, at least for now. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of